Welcome to the Social Bee Podcast with your host, Louise Brogan. Every week, Louise will be bringing you a podcast all about women entrepreneurs, talking about their challenges, their goals, and inspiring you to either start your own business or grow the business you have. Visit www.socialbeeni.com to join our community and pick up some lovely freebies to start marketing your business online today.
Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Social Bee Podcast. Today I have got a podcast expert on for you all, which is really exciting. I actually heard Colin speak a couple of times at big conferences here in the UK, and we met in Janet Murray's event recently in London in June, and of course I invited Colin onto the podcast. So Colin, welcome to the Social Bee Podcast.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
And I haven't even said your surname or anything.
It's not important. It's a boring surname, don't worry.
Do you want to just take a moment, Colin, and introduce yourself to everybody and tell them really what your business is all about?
Yeah, so I'm Colin Gray. Gray is the second name. And I run a business called thepodcasthost.com and alitu.com. Really, the whole principle behind what I do is helping anyone to start and run a successful podcast. So we run a few podcasts ourselves, have run many over the years. We write about it on the Podcast Host, just writing loads of articles and stuff on podcasting. And we run a podcast called Podcraft as well. And really, it all just started because I was teaching podcasting in the end back in 2008 or so at a university. I was a learning technologist, so I taught lecturers how to use technology to teach their students more effectively. And I was actually just told, so there's this fancy new podcasting thing. I don't know what it means. Can you go and find out what that means? And so I was tasked with going off to learn what podcasting was and ended up teaching that as a course at the university for a few years. And I just ended up writing about the whole sort of area because I just loved it. I fell in love with the fact that you could just, just quite an intimate medium. Just you can talk to people in such a sort of informal, friendly way. You get lots of attention. People can listen for half an hour or an hour because it fills in this time that would otherwise be wasted often. It's like you listen while you're ironing or cutting the grass or walking the dog. So I just loved it. Started writing a lot about it, created podcasts. And that was what grew into the podcasthost.com, the website I run now. So really everything we do now revolves around that site and just helping anyone to get into podcasting themselves.
Well, Colin, I live in Belfast and podcasts probably hit here a little bit later than even in Scotland. And I was speaking at an event last week and I said, hands up who in the room listens to podcasts. And about half the room put their hand up. But if I had asked that a year before, you might have only had 5 or 6 people putting their hands up.
Yeah.
I love podcasting as well. But tell me this, what university was it?
It was Edinburgh Napier.
Oh, I thought it might have been Dundee.
Okay, no, I only moved up here a few years back.
Oh, okay, yes. Because we were chatting about how I went to Dundee. It's a fabulous city.
Yes.
That's really fascinating, I think, how you got into the whole remit of podcasting. And do you think when you started, Colin, and when you launched your first podcast, do you think there were many podcasts here in the UK?
I think there were a lot less, certainly, than now. But there weren't many, no. I mean, ironically, the first ever podcast I listened to was a UK podcast. I found it on a cover disc on a magazine. Remember the days when magazines had cover discs on?
Yes.
This podcaster had hit on this idea of like, the trouble back then was how hard it was to listen to podcasts. Like you had to go out there, you had to buy an MP3 player, then you had to plug it into your computer. You had to synchronize all the episodes, delete the ones you'd listened to, upload the ones you haven't listened to yet. It was just it was a nightmare. So this guy had put them out on a cover disc. And he was actually a UK podcaster. So he is one of the earliest podcasters around. A guy called Paul Boag. He podcasts about web design. And that was the first ever show I listened to. And he was UK based, ironically. So,
that's so cool.
Despite the fact that I went on and listened to mostly American shows from there. But there's a lot more now. We're still lagging a little bit behind the US, certainly. But we're catching up, I would say.
Yeah, the number of people who come to workshops that I'm running. So for example, I did a local mastermind here in Belfast and we kind of did like a half hour at the end of, kind of ask me anything. And 3/4 of the room wanted to know about how to start a podcast, which I was quite surprised about. So it's people are recognizing the value in having a podcast, I think, in terms of marketing their business now.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's become much more mainstream in the last year or so. We get a lot more inquiries these days, and it's cool that people are seeing the value in it. And I think it's been mainly the fact that there's a lot more good shows around now as well. I mean, there was always good shows there, but there's so many more of them now. It's great.
What do you think makes a good show? So say if you were talking to somebody who has their own business, what would you say to them would make for you a good podcasting show?
I mean, the power of podcasting really is around the personality, is the people, it's the host, whether it's one person who's hosting it or whether it's a little team of people, 2 or 3 or 4. It's around those people and their background, their personality. It's all around their uniqueness, what makes them different. So if you're doing a podcast on marketing, to take a topic we're talking about just now, you do a podcast about marketing, there's dozens of them around, if not hundreds. So you have to find a way to make it interesting. A lot of that will be around your own presentation skills, your own knowledge, your own experience. But actually, the most important part for me right now about how to make that good and valuable and have the best chance of growing is your uniqueness. So it's what you bring to it. Might be the slant on the content. So it might be that you choose a niche of that. So you do a lot more social marketing, for example, social marketing, a niche of marketing. Or you could go even more specific. You could do Twitter marketing. Even more specific, you could do something like Twitter advertising for marketing. So you can take that angle on it to be unique. And that's one way to do it. But actually, I think that can be combined much more effectively with something that makes you unique as well. So that could be your experience. And often I find a good way to make a podcast unique, or any content really, is to combine a bit of your work experience with a bit of your personal experience. I say what makes my content unique is the fact that I have that teaching experience. So I was an actual teacher for 5 or 6 years. So I bring in a bit of that, like being able to explain the things, just having that sort of patience around it, the organization. The fact that I started with seasons-based podcasting was really because I was a teacher. I just thought in terms of courses. So I wanted to do a course of 5 episodes or 10 episodes that really went deep on something. So that was something that I think made my content unique. But it might be something completely different. It might be that you had a completely different job outside of marketing when you were younger, or even a hobby or something like that. Like often I'll bring in mountain biking. So mountain biking is one of my hobbies. And I'll bring that into my marketing content. Just as an example. And I kind of, it's something that makes mine a bit more unique. I can kind of push that metaphor a bit and say that it's like, it's a way, as a mountain biker, I have to learn how to, manage risk and sort of balance risk with enjoyment. And that can come into my podcasting, my content. It's kind of, but you know what I mean? Like you can bring in your hobbies, your sort of personal background, your work background, combine the 3. And actually that to me is what gives you your unique angle. That is what makes for a successful show.
Excellent. You talked there about how you started with seasons. That's something that you and I had talked about in person. So can you explain, so people who are listening, who are thinking about a podcast, can you explain a little bit how that works, Colin?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, it's becoming more common now, but it certainly wasn't very common at all a few years ago. And it was the idea that you do a set of episodes, whether that's, whatever number it might be, that concentrate on one topic, and they actually have a link between them all. And I mentioned the word course a little while. It's kind of just like creating a course around something. Yes. So an example with ours is sort of a recent season we did was on podcast equipment on Podcraft. So we covered all the different aspects of podcast equipment in 6 episodes. No, it was 8 actually on that one. We could have done 1 episode on podcast equipment, covered the whole thing.
Yeah.
Instead, and I think, just to delve in there, I think that's something that a lot of podcasters do wrong, which is try to cover too much. They worry that if you go too specific, people get a bit frustrated because you're not covering enough. Like, I need to cover it all. I need to cover the whole thing. I need to create the ultimate guide to equipment in this 1 episode. But actually, I feel people value the specifics more. They prefer you to go really deep on one aspect of it. And seasons are a really nice way to do that, because you can end up with, so that season on podcast equipment, we ended up with It's one resource. It is an ultimate guide, but it's spread over 8 episodes. Each episode links into the next. So the first episode is podcast microphones. Then the next one is podcast mixers. Then it's podcast recorders. And each one, we're building up the big picture. We're saying the microphone then plugs into the recorder, then plugs into the mixer, and this is how it goes. It doesn't matter what topic you're teaching. You can create a season of, say, 4, 8, 12 episodes that delve deep into one of the most common questions you're asked and really give people the real deep detail, just building it up episode by episode by episode that just helps people learn. And I find there's a bunch of benefits to this. There's benefits for you in that it's so much easier to plan because you can take that one topic, say you were going to teach Twitter marketing, you break that down into 12 episodes. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4. They build on each other. So you can plan it really easily all up front, and you have that plan to refer back to for the whole sort of 2 or 3 months worth of content. Takes the stress out of it there. You take a break at the end. Podcast seasons are great because you can take a month off. You can just, it doesn't feel like you're on that content treadmill anymore, having to get something out every single week. But the best thing is, for me, it's actually much better for your listeners too, in a lot of ways, because you're building week to week. You're not jumping around, changing topic every week, changing level every week. You're actually building week to week to week. People are much more likely to stay involved, to listen every single week, to learn just a bit more, to advance just a bit more, to feel just a bit more successful every single time. And that helps them be great at what they do, but also encourages them to be really loyal to you, because grow that trust, grow into loyal fans, into fanatical fans of your show.
Yeah, I've seen some people who maybe would release what they would call a season, but they would literally release all 5 episodes on the one day. What do you call that? Is that like a season thing, or are they doing that to boost their numbers and Apple Podcasts? Why are they doing that?
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely still a season. And a lot of people took that approach partly because of the whole Netflix approach. Like, that's what Netflix do. It's the concept of binging, I suppose.
Yeah.
If you give people 8 episodes, then you hope that they'll binge the whole 8 all at once. I know people who've tried it, and I can see kind of the thinking behind it, but I don't think it suits the podcast medium.
No.
Really. Podcasting is something you get in a routine. People will listen to your show every week, Louise. They'll know when it's coming. They'll listen to it every week, and that's in part of their routine.
Yeah.
Whereas if you give somebody 8 episodes to binge through, they're going to pick and choose. I've 8 episodes. That's like 8 hours worth of stuff. I'm going to listen to this one and that one, but I'm going to miss out that one and that one. And it just doesn't really build that habit. It doesn't build that kind of that power of podcasting, which is people, listening to you every week and trusting you and just keeping up with what you're up to. So I prefer to spread it out and actually still stick with the weekly or the fortnightly schedule.
Yes, I definitely prefer the weekly schedule. Now, interestingly, mine comes out on a Monday morning, and I am considering moving it to a Tuesday.
Okay, sure.
I don't know if there's any... I know there's no data behind that decision for me. I think having everything ready to go on a Monday morning is a little bit much, because then I'm checking stuff Sunday night.
Yes.
Whereas actually, if it went out on Tuesday morning, I think that would be handier for me.
Yeah.
But as you say, people are in their routine, because I know my favourite podcast comes out every Thursday. So I know it's Thursday, it's time to listen to the Biz Chicks podcast. So they definitely, and people say to me, yes, it starts off their week by listening to this podcast. Thank you, lovely listeners, for doing that. So I think, it doesn't really matter what day, does it?
Yeah, I think it depends a lot on your audience as well. Like, some people's audiences will be more active on a Tuesday or a Thursday or at 10 p.m. or at 7 a.m. or that's down to testing yourself and trying different methods, getting in touch with your listeners as well, there are other shows as well where they put it out every week. It doesn't matter what day. And actually, another benefit of podcasting is that doesn't actually matter too much. It can help. People will look out for your show at particular times, but if you can only manage it, a Tuesday or a Wednesday or a Thursday, people can listen anytime. It's an on-demand medium. You can download it and listen on your own time. So it doesn't make a huge difference if you have to be a bit flexible.
Yes. Well, there have been the occasion, so we're nearly 100 episodes, and there has been the occasional episode that hasn't come out on time.
And did people chase you up for it?
No, they didn't. But also they didn't give me